Welcome to the Better Bid Calling Podcast, a podcast designed with you in mind. Our goal is to make good auctioneers great and great auctioneers better through education and motivation. Join your host, champion auctioneer Joshua Houston, and his award-winning and industry-leading guests every month to learn insights and tips regarding the auction contest and the auction industry so you too can proudly say, sold! Welcome, everyone, to the very first inaugural episode of the Better Bid Calling Podcast. I'm Joshua Houston. I'll be your host, and I am here today with a man who has become a very good friend of mine, although we haven't really known each other very long. We met back in November at the Tennessee Auctioneers Association competition, the auction contest there, where I was fortunate to get first, and that was just barely because Rylan came in second, and he nearly whooped me. Some
say second, I say best loser.
Hey, there you go. That's fine. Best loser, yeah, yeah. It's there's no such thing as second place, only first loser, right?
That's right. That's right.
No,
like
man.
Said, if you're not first, you're last.
Yeah. Well, if y'all haven't seen the live stream of the Tennessee Auctioneers Contest, you need to go watch it because Rylan smoked it. But then you need to go watch the Kentucky Auctioneers Association live stream because when I say Rylan smoked it in Tennessee, he tripled it in Kentucky. I was very, very blessed to be one of the judges for that contest, and Rylan just knocked it dead. I mean, it was a tight contest between a few of the contestants, but boy, I mean, just watching Rylan was like watching just the picture of what a champion bid caller should be. And so Rylan is your 2022 Tennessee Auctioneer Association Reserve Champion. He's your 2023 Kentucky Auctioneer Association Grand Champion. And Rylan, those are the only two contests that I know of from you, but I would almost assume you've been in others. Have you been in others, or have those been your only two?
Those are the only two that I've been in that were that I was a contender, if you will. I competed in Kentucky in 2016, and that was when I was fresh into the business. You know, I got licensed in 2015, and I jumped in. You know, it's so funny. Our instructors right out of auction school or even during auction school are such advocates for competing because they know how much better competing will make you as an auctioneer. And sometimes it's hard because especially if you're new to the industry, if you're a first generation auctioneer like myself, it can be very intimidating because you're like, golly, I don't come from this background. I know nothing about it. Yeah. But that encouragement from the instructors is ultimately what pushed me to compete in 2016. So I had been licensed for, golly, maybe 6 months, and I had done, 4 or 5, maybe a few more sales leading up to that point. And so mic time I had very little of, and it was, 2016 was interesting. I'll just say that I wasn't even in the running. I was up there, looked like a piece of like a 2x4. I was so stiff. I was so nervous, and but it made me better. And I know that for a fact. And I actually took a hiatus and didn't compete again until 2021. So I got my butt whooped in 2016 and then took a 5-year hiatus, which I greatly wish I had not done. Because competing at this point means an awful lot to me. And I know how much, I can't imagine where I would be now had I continued to compete over the next 4 years. So I did myself a disservice by taking that break, but that's just part of it. That's just part of my story, I guess. And it wasn't until November of 2021 that I competed again in Tennessee at the Tennessee Auctioneers Association State Championship. And that year, I believe, made the finals. I don't remember. Were you there in 2021?
I was not there in 2021. The first and last time I competed was in 2022. So I competed once and once, and now I don't get to go back.
Yeah, I remember Wade Leist or Wade Leist.
Wade Leist
come down from Michigan, And Wade is just such a phenomenal guy and such an incredible big color. And Tanner Roberts was there as well. I mean, there are just some absolutely dynamite guys there. And of course, Tanner Roberts is a Kentucky state champion as well. So some great guys. And all I can think about when I think about competing is sharpening your skill. There is no stage. I say this all the time, and it kind of makes me laugh. I would rather get on stage in my boxers in front of 1,000 people at a fundraising gala than get on the stage in front of 150 to 200 of my peers, because these people know when I mess up. This is what they do. But when it's 1,000 people at a fundraiser, it's just they got no clue if I jarble my words or what have you. So it always makes
the guys
me laugh,
that are there, the guys that are there watching you, they've been auctioneers for golly, how long? Sometimes 40, 50 years, and they're winning the Lifetime Achievement Awards, and they're the ones getting inducted in the Hall of Fame. And then you get up there.
They're the people that I've looked up to since I got into business. Like, golly, if I could be that one day, that would be so awesome.
But they're the reasons why we do what we do, because they had an influence on us. And that's one reason why we wanted to start this podcast. We're going to do one episode a month with different auctioneers and those who compete, some who don't. But we wanted to do that because, we want to be that for other people too. These young guys coming up, Rylan, I heard a statistic the other day that I'm proud of, but it bothered me a little bit. It's that we have more people getting in the auction industry, going to auction school, wanting to be live bid callers, but there's less opportunities for them to do that. And I really think that within our lifetime, with the shift of auctions the way that they're going, probably one of the only places you're going to see a live auction is going to be either in a really big real estate sale, a auction competition, or a livestock barn. The days of auction houses, personal property, consignment sales, they're getting less and less, and they're starting to go out the window. So, auction contests are one way that we can promote this art that we want to hold on to. Well, let me ask you then, you kind of alluded to it just a minute ago, but what is it that got you in the auction industry? Is that what you've done your whole professional career? Did you do something else? What led you to where you are now?
Yeah. So, I've thought about this for a long time, and this is actually going to sound incredibly cheesy, but it's true. My passion for helping people is what got me into the auction business, and I had never in my entire life dreamed of being an auctioneer. It wasn't on my radar. It was not something that I had ever thought about. I guess it was spring of 2015. I had just retired my college career is the best way that I found to say that. But I had just retired my college career, and I really had about two weeks where, there was so much strife. I didn't know, oh my gosh, my family's going to hate me. Here I am dropping out of school. I'm 19 years old, don't know what the heck to do. And after about 2 weeks, I ran into Steve Cherry. And Steve Cherry, Kentucky state champion and owner of the Kentucky Auction Academy. It was so funny. I was mowing my dad's car wash, and I was in the back lot on this mower, and there was this guy walking around the car wash looking like a lost puppy. And I jumped off the mower and I ran up to him and I said, is there anything I can help you with? You look like you need help. And he said, actually, I just bought my daughter this car and the battery died. Do you have any jumper cables? And I said, I don't, but my dad's right up the road and he could run up here with some. And we just sat there and talked for a minute. And he said, he said, I used to know the man who owns this car, or who owned this car wash. And there had only been one owner of the car wash, which was my dad. And I said, you're not talking about Greg Shea, are you? And he said, I am. I said, well, Greg is my dad. And just so happened that Steve was my dad's realtor auctioneer for years when my dad first moved to Kentucky. Wow. So Steve knew me when I was a little boy. He knew me when I was a baby, and the connection obviously just had gotten lost through time. But we actually sat and talked when Dad got there. It was like, old friends connecting. We sat and talked for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and Steve said, "Have you ever considered being an auctioneer?" And I was like, "Absolutely not. No, that is not on my radar. Never has been." And he said, "Well, I own the Kentucky Auction Academy. Would love for you to come and, give the school a run." And I went to the school, and I knew, I went to the school. It was probably a month later or so. And from that point on, it was history. After the first day, I knew this is divine intervention. God has led me to this, and I'm going to jump in with both feet and do the absolute best that I can to be the best auctioneer that I can. And golly, it's been a whirlwind, but it has been a blessing that I could never, obviously every auctioneer has their own story, but I could never really be able to convey how big of a blessing this has been to me in my life and my family. So I'm just incredibly humbled that this is the path that God chose for me. But, here we are, and we're doing what we're doing, and we're having fun.
That's awesome, man. Well, what is it that got you to compete? What was it that encouraged you to get on stage for the first time?
Yeah, we get so much encouragement from our instructors, whether it's, and I think you could go to any auction school in the country. There's some, Kentucky Auction Academy is phenomenal. But I'm confident that you could go to any school in the country and your instructors would encourage you to compete, because to be in an instructor position, you really have to be an advocate for the auction industry as a whole. And what accompanies that is the live auction method of marketing. My instructors, obviously Steve Cherry, Steve Henry, and Tim Haley, who is Steve Henry and Tim Haley were both inductees to the Kentucky Hall of Fame this past weekend, which is just a huge blessing for them. But all of these instructors encourage me to compete. They're like, "Hey, it's going to make you better. You're going to be nervous. You're probably going to hate it. And you're going to get your butt whooped a lot more than you win. But you need to do it because it's going to make you a better auctioneer." And being a first generation auctioneer, I think is a very unique thing a very unique title to hold. And the reason that I say that is because as a first generation auctioneer, I did not have a large wealth of knowledge bestowed upon me from a young age. I had to jump in and seek out higher educational opportunities. I had to, get connected with people like you, people like Jay Cash, people like Shane McCarroll, people that are not only in the auction business, they're in the business big. And that's, I think that's something that has always encouraged me to compete, because I've seen what it's done for these guys. It's like, well, golly, look at these folks. What are they doing? How are they getting this status? And it's not about the status, but how are they getting these opportunities brought their way? How are they, being in the spotlight so much? Well, the answer is that they're advocates for the live auction method of marketing, which I think is so important because, like you said, it's a dying art, and not a dying art, but it's not as prevalent as it used to be. And, sure. I think that, and I'm sure that you would agree with me, I've thought about this a lot. I really do think that a live auction, no matter how brief or how long, at least for a second, when that auctioneer starts his chant, it brings an overwhelming amount of joy and happiness to anyone that is in earshot of that sound. There's something that happens inside of you, and that's one of my favorite parts about doing fundraising galas, because these people aren't accustomed to auctioneers getting on the microphone and just going absolutely fire on the mic. And you can see they start nudging each other. They're tapping each other like, he's doing it. Look, he's doing it. And they get so excited. And I really do think that that sound and the art of a live auction brings out the best of people. And whether it's for a second or for the entire auction, we get to be the reason someone smiles that day. Yeah. And that's what an honor to get to do that. You know, that's our voice and it's our art, our craft that we have perfected. And that craft that means so much to us brings joy to other people. And that's pretty cool.
I remember when I was in auction school, I went to Nashville Auction School, which actually was not in Nashville. It was in Tullahoma when I went. But Wendell Hansen at the time was the owner and the main teacher at Nashville Auction School. And he told us, if you can be an entertainer as an auctioneer, you will get more business, you will hold attention longer, and ultimately you will do better for your seller because people are invested and they're looking at you and you're not losing their attention. So exactly what you said, you have an opportunity to help people have some enjoyment at that time. You know, you don't know what's going on in their life. And if 5 minutes of them hearing you rattle off and bring the excitement up, I mean, that could really help somebody, even if they never give the first bid. But also, you know, I'm in full agreement with you. I think, too, that the live auction method of marketing, or just the auction method of marketing to be more broad, is the best way to market your assets. It really is, because it develops competition. And without competition, you're not going to have true price discovery. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit more then about your competing and the responsibilities that come along with that, because you and I, as current state champions, and most everyone that we get on this podcast for the coming year is going to be a state champion of some kind. A few of them aren't, but being a state champion or even an IEC champion, by the way, are you planning on going to the IEC now?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Good for you.
My fiance and I will just be returning from our honeymoon, but she's all on board. She knows that right when we get back, we're jumping in the truck and driving down to Oklahoma City. So we are super excited for that. I'm over the moon about it.
That's awesome, man. I'm proud for you. I'll be rooting for you. So as a state champion, we have the honor and the responsibility of being representatives for that state for the coming year. And like yourself, if you compete in multiple states, which, you know, Tennessee is an open contest, and anyone listening to this who wants to compete, I would highly encourage you to come to Tennessee and compete. Last year they had, I think, the largest number of entries that they had in the state's history. So it's growing and doing well. Kentucky's, on the other hand, is a closed contest. You have to be licensed in Kentucky, and you have to have a residence in Kentucky. So a reciprocal license cannot compete. But that being said, you now, as a reserve champion of Tennessee and a grand champion of Kentucky, have the great honor of being an association representative. I would say of both, you know,
absolutely,
since you had your presence there in Tennessee as well, but especially the Kentucky Auctioneers Association. So talk a little bit about being a representative and how you can be an advocate for the industry. You know, in our interviews, that's one question, is like, how are you going to be an advocate for this industry? And I think it's important that people understand we're not doing this just for the buckle. We're doing it because we have a love for the industry and a love for these state and national organizations as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's the buckle, ring, whatever you're receiving from any contest you compete in is so secondary. You know, it's cool to put on the shelf, whatever. But at the end of the day, you get an opportunity to represent an industry that more than likely, if you're in the competition stage, the industry means a lot to you. So to get the title is wonderful, but to use it is another thing. And, you know, for me, I've been racking my brain a million ways, you know, every day this last week and twice on Sunday, trying to figure out how can I be a voice for auctioneers? How can I be an educator to consumers? And how can I shed a positive light on the auction method of marketing that we care so much about? And I think at the end of the day, being a good example is the first thing that I can do. Being a good example, saying, look, this is how business should be conducted. You know, you need to be working with an auction professional who represents the industry, because as a member of our state associations, you know, what a blessing to get to be a member of an association that holds us to such high standards. Whether it's the NAA or the state association, we have responsibilities. We have, you know, a course of action to conduct business that reflects the auction industry in the highest of lights. And one thing I will say is that the auction business now is in a better place than it ever has been because of the leadership at the NAA and at each state conventions, each state association. The auction industry is moving in the right direction solely because of the leadership. You know, for me, I'm going to make it my mission this year to better educate the public on the auction method of marketing and the numerous benefits that accompany it. You know, I want to teach buyers about how transparent the process is, why that's beneficial to them. I want to teach sellers about the competitive nature of an auction, why that's beneficial to them. Why should people compete for my asset? Well, if you want the highest and best price realized, you would let them compete. You know, we hear it all the time with different real estate agents, especially over the course of the last year and a half. You know, whether they're working with a buyer and a buyer misses out on a property. Okay, well, if they wrote a blind offer on a property and they missed it, what do they always say? I would have paid more had I known what I was competing against. Well, golly, that sure sounds like an auction to me, Josh.
Absolutely.
You know, if we can make it transparent, we can make it to where everyone's on the same playing field. That only does a huge, huge benefit to the seller, and teaching the seller that, hey, this works. You know, it blows my mind. If you go over to West Virginia, one of my very good friends, James Yoder with Kaufman Realty and Auction, they, you know, their market, the live auction method of marketing that's the first resort for a lot of sellers. They don't think about listing with a realtor. They think about, okay, we need to get this property ready for auction. Which get it ready for auction, what does that mean? I mean, you know, as is, where is, no warranties, no contingencies. But it's the first resort for them because they understand how beneficial the live auction method of marketing is. Yeah. So, and to have a ripple effect or some type of communication to the public as to why it's so beneficial is going to be very important. And it's going to be a mission of mine this year to do that. And I hope that I do a good job. You know,
I know you will.
That's all I can hope for, but I'm going to give it my all.
Yep, I know you will. I have been a Rylan Shea #1 fan since the moment I met you, because I see a genuine love for what you do. You're a genuine person, and sometimes you get that in this industry. Sometimes you don't.
Sometimes you don't, and that's okay.
Sometimes you don't, and but you know what? I love you, and I love what you're doing there. Let me ask you a couple more questions here before our time runs out.
Yeah.
Let's go back to competitions for just a minute, because most people listening to this, well, we're the Better Bid Calling podcast, and I hope that anyone who wants to improve themselves will listen to this and be benefited by it. But a lot of the people who listen or who like the Facebook page or whatever are doing it because they want help with competition. So
absolutely.
Let me ask you this about competition. If you were asked, and you probably were last weekend, by a fellow competitor, what advice would you give someone who is wanting to compete?
Oh, gosh. Wanting to compete or about to compete? Those are two different questions.
Either one or both.
You know, for someone wanting to compete, the biggest piece of advice I have to offer is, if you want to compete and you don't compete, the only person you're cheating is yourself. That is the biggest piece of advice that I could give you. So if you back out on it, just know the only person that's being affected negatively is you. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but Proverbs, I believe it's 27:17, iron sharpens iron, so too one man sharpens another. There could not be a better verse from the Bible to speak to what competing does for an auctioneer. It will help you fine tune your skills. And that comes back to that getting on stage in front of your peers. Mm-hmm. When you get on stage in front of your peers, first thing it's going to do is, after that experience, you'll be able to get on stage in front of anyone, anywhere in this world, and you won't be affected the way that you'll be affected when you're on stage in front of your peers. And secondly, when you step off that stage, good, bad, and different, no matter how you did, you are going to get nothing but love and constructive criticism that sometimes is hard to hear, but you have to receive it with a good heart. You have to know these people care because they care about this industry. So they want me to be better because they love this industry. And when you know that, it's like, okay, what is the only way to lose this competition? And that's to not do it, or to quit after you lose one time. Because there have been very, very few auctioneers to ever go and compete one time and win.
Yes.
I mean, a very select few. That's not to say that it can't be done, but you're going to take some L's before you take some W's, and that's okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because every L you take, you just fine tuning that skill.
Yep. And as far as competitions are concerned, from where I'm sitting, as someone who's competed for a long time, and now as someone who's had the pleasure of being a judge in one, part of competing too is, you have things you need to work on, for sure. Everybody does. But part of competing is getting in front of 4 or 5 judges who like you that day.
Yeah.
I have competed in contests where I competed in the Mule Day contest 5 or 6 years in a row, placed in the top 10 every year, but there have been probably 4 out of the 5 where I've had people come up and say, we had you picked to either win or to place a lot higher. The fact of the matter was, that day, in those judges' eyes, somebody else was better. So keep competing, keep doing it. If you do it once, it's addictive. It really is. And you'll want to keep doing it as well. And, going off of what you said about people making you better, I have made so many relationships just from going to contests. And I mean, look at what we're doing now. We wouldn't be here had we not been competing against each other. So one final question, Rylan, and we'll be done. We talked about advice for someone who's wanting to compete, maybe someone who is about to compete, and this may transition into someone about to compete. What advice would you give someone who is just out of auction school, they're working on their chant, they've got something that is passable, but it's not professional? What advice would you give to someone who is wanting to improve their auction chant?
Well, that's a big question, because there is no one chant in the auction industry or in the world that's the same.
Yep, absolutely.
There are some that are very similar. Mm-hmm. And then there are some that you hear a lot of similar things, but no one auction chant is the same. And I think the reason that is because you are an individual, and it is important to remember that. When you're working on your chant, I can't tell you, my chant when I first got out of auction school, golly, I'd be embarrassed. If there's a video that surfaces somewhere, I'm probably going to put an investigator out there to get that video removed, because my chant several years ago was, even 2 years ago, was absolutely horrible. But here's what I will say. When you're working on your chant, it is so important to find, it's almost like a duck call. Okay. Now, if you're a duck hunter, there's this infamous feed chuckle. Well, a feed chuckle is not, some people call it machine gunning. It's not 100,000 miles an hour. You don't want that. It is always, you want rhythm first.
Yes.
You want rhythm, you want clarity, and you want to get those two things down so well that when the speed starts to get incorporated, you don't have to worry about these other pieces of the puzzle because they're already there. They're glued to the board. You can add speed whenever you want as soon as you get those things down. So what I would do, just like every auctioneer does, I would drive in my truck, and I'd be like, find a phrase, here to buy, get them on 25. Does that sound good? Did he give money, give dollar now? And then I'm starting to piece together different things. And I'm like, okay, if I can make that sound as good as my number sound without the filler, if I can make that flow, then I'll use it. But if I feel like there's a hiccup or a break or something that interrupts it, the flow of the sound, then I'm like, okay, I got to pull that out. I need to go back to the drawing board and I think that's an important thing too. One thing that I practice a bunch is writing on a board. Just like you're hearing it and speaking it, if you can visualize it and say it out loud, $25 now, 30 now, 30, give me 30, what do you get 30 here? If I get them on $30 here. If you can visualize it, get it on your hard drive, now you're not thinking about what your chant is. Your chant's just there. But your numbers, practice your numbers. You can count. You can't count that good. Practice them more. 2.5, 5, 7.5, 10, 12.5, 15. Practice your numbers because if you don't know your number brackets, your chant is never going to progress because that's where you get into. You may get all the speed, all the rhythm you want, but you're going to catch a hiccup when you don't know what your next number is or when you don't know how to get there. So, and then I guess, I'll finish by saying, don't be afraid to record yourself. Don't be afraid to share those recordings with a fellow professional because if you're running in the right circle, you should be able to send these recordings to anyone in your circle and then say, hey, I think that sounded great. Here's what I think you should work on. And like I said earlier, take that with a good heart. Okay, all right. I got I'm headed in the right direction. And it's all about building confidence. You have to build that confidence, and sometimes getting that pat on the back from someone will help do that. But at the same time, sometimes you have to be your own confidence advocate, which is one thing that I've learned. And I'm going to jump backwards really quick and talk about to get on stage. When you're about to get on stage, there's a conversation that I would say most competitors have this conversation, and if they don't, I would be baffled because I do this every time I'm about to step on stage. I have to remind myself, because we get so juiced up on competing, I have to remind myself, look, this is what God has led you to do. You're an auctioneer. You're a professional, and you love this business. Now you get up there and do what God has led you to do, and everything's going to take care of itself. Win, lose, draw, does not matter. Get up there, be yourself, stand for what you believe in, and do what you know how to do. You know what to do. The question is, are your nerves going to get you?
Yep.
And sometimes having that conversation with yourself is super important.
Yeah, I heard a bull rider say one time, that was being interviewed, and they said, do you pray before you get on? And he said, well, I used to pray that I'd win. Then I realized God gave me the talent to win, and now it's my job to get on there and do my job.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good perspective. So you brought a lot to the table today, Rylan. I'm incredibly thankful for your time. I got one question for you, though, and it's not one that I sent you beforehand. How about we hear some of that auction chant before we go?
You
do. Sell us something. Why don't you sell us something?
All right. On the AirPods right here, having it on some of it 5, 10, if 5, 10, 15, 20, but get $25 here, but get money, get down now, 25, 30, if $30 here, but get money, get down now, but get 30 now, 35 and $40 here, but get 40, now 5, at 45, 50, 7 $50 here, but get money, get down now, but get 50. I've sold it, 45, put them on buyer number, Joshua, Houston.
Right. Good job, brother. As always, man. Love listening to you. Love talking to you. thank you so much for being on the Better Bid Calling podcast today. Guys, if you're interested in perfecting your chant, if you're interested in perfecting your art as an auctioneer, check out Better Bid Calling on Facebook. Check out the podcast that comes out, the helpful videos that are being released almost daily. Also, we're going to have a seminar. We're going to have a bid calling seminar probably the first or second weekend in December. I'll be putting details about that up very shortly, probably within the next couple of months. So a lot going on, a lot around outside of just what we're doing here at Better Bid Calling. You have all kinds of resources to you to help improve yourself as a bid caller and ultimately as an auctioneer. That's what we're all about here. We're about you. So Rylan, again, thank you for being on with us. And guys, we'll see you hopefully, Lord willing, next month with the next guest.